Good afternoon, everyone, on this beautiful fall afternoon. The day after the Washington Nationals won the first game of the World Series last night, I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest webinar in our monthly series of webinars. Today's session is on practicing trustworthy behaviors. Would you trust you and why? Today's session is being conducted by one of my long-term colleagues, Bill Benner, and we're delighted that Bill is with us today. I'm 100% confident that you will find this of interest. Before we get into the content, what I want to do is like to introduce Bill, and then tell you a little bit about Boxer Advisors. We have an interesting mix of clients and colleagues and some people who are new to us. So I'll tell you a little about us. Then I want to talk a little bit about the pre-work and then the workshop objectives, and then off Bill will go. So look at that handsome man to the right there. That's Bill Benner. And Bill and I have been colleagues for many years. We actually met, I'll bet you it might be, is it true, Bill? I was going to say almost maybe 30 years ago. Is that possible?
I think it is, Ken. Yeah, it goes way back.
Yep. So I met Bill when he was at the time internal with the Federal Reserve system. And since that time, Bill has his own consulting practice. And in our business, there are not that many people who are triple threats, but Bill is. He is a really good executive coach. He is a really talented organization development consultant, and he is a really good trainer. And one of the things that he is an expert in is this whole issue of trust, which I think is just so important to our clients today. And so, Bill, I'm delighted to have you join us today, and I'll let you say hello to everyone.
Thank you very much, Ken. Your comments are very kind. I truly appreciate them, and it's great to be with you all again for these informational webinars on topics that I think are really quite important in today's world, and particularly in our work environment. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, or what I want to cover today, is not just about what takes place within an organization or on a team, but really gets at the person, gets at you, gets you to think about what are the things or behaviors that you practice or don't practice that engender trust, that solidify it over time, that make people want to come to you because they can trust you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, the trust work actually started back in 2006, 2007, and I've worked with two other colleagues to develop what we call our Transcendence Trust Model, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get into the content of the webinar. And really look forward to your thoughts and ideas with respect to how you can personally apply this.
That's great. So next slide, Bill. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about Boxer Advisors. There are some of you who are new to us. So I'll tell you a little bit about us, and then talk a little bit about ground rules for the session. So the mission of Boxer Advisors is to deliver a high impact consulting, coaching, and training solutions to meet our organizational client needs. I think the end of the day, what sets us apart is our work to strategically integrate our solutions into client environments, and to think about ways to help people translate insights into action. And so when we do those things, we're proud of the measurable return on investment that many of our clients have seen. Next slide. At the end of the day, there are three things that we do at Boxer Advisors. We help our clients develop leadership capabilities. We help our clients drive organizational change, and we help our clients engage and retain top talent. So those are the three things that we do. Uh, Before we move forward, I just want to talk a little bit about some ground rules or logistical issues for the webinar. So the good news is we have a packed house with the webinar today, which is one of the reasons why we have muted you. Just because when we have so many people on a webinar like this, sometimes you have dogs barking or kids screaming or fire engines going by, and that can get in the way of the session. We will end promptly at 2 p.m. And so there are three ways for you to interact in the session today. One is Bill has developed several polling questions. And so when we launch them, we would encourage you to quickly vote, provide your input, and then we'll summarize what we hear from all of you. The second is if you do have questions or comments, there's a chat bar. If you look typically on your control panel, which on my computer is at the bottom of my screen, it says chat or message. You should be able to type in a response there. And one of the things that we will do is we'll review the responses that we did get from the pre-work. And for those people who didn't have a chance to do that, and you have a response to the pre-work, you can offer your responses there. And then the third way is, again, I don't know about all of you, but I can speak for myself that, in a 60-minute webinar, there have been some times that I get off the webinar, I say, darn, I wish I had asked that question. And so at the end of the webinar, we will give you my email address. And if there's a question that you either you wanted to ask Bill but didn't have time to ask Bill, or B, Bill didn't have a chance to answer, or C, you think about it afterwards, just shoot me an email and we'll respond to them quickly. The two things that I'd like for all of you to be thinking about as we go through the webinar, and we'll send these two questions in a little follow-up survey that I think all of you should get within 24 hours of the session, is what's one thing that you learned or confirmed from today's webinar, and what's one action you're going to take. Again, I'm very confident, given my review of the topic and talking with Bill in preparation for the webinar, that you'll find this of value. But if you can be thinking about those two questions, that would be great. Before we move forward, if anyone is having any technical difficulties, Sarah, if you can put your email into the chat bar, that would be great. If for some reason you can't hear us, if for some reason you can't see the PowerPoint, send an email to Sarah, and she is as good as they get in handling technical questions that you might have. So with that, let's dive into some of the questions that we asked in the pre-work. And so what we'll do is I'll ask the question. Bill will provide a quick summary of the responses we did get. And then if any of you, we've got a full house today. If any of you didn't have an opportunity to answer them, you can type out your responses in the chat bar. So Bill, the first question we asked people was, how did you learn about the webinar? What brought you here today?
Right, and most people responded. They learned about it from the email invite, and or I believe going to your website, the Boxer Advisors website.
I see.
To see the session. So yeah, I think that was pretty much how people learned about it.
That's great. So I would say to everyone, I'm pretty certain that Sarah will let you know, but at the end of the session, she'll list the webinar that we're having in November, and we may do one in December, and we're in the process of refining our schedule for next year. So be on the lookout for that. So if people heard about the webinar or have some other thoughts about what brought you here today, you can type those in the chat bar. The second question is we ask people is, what would they like to accomplish? So Bill, what did people say in response to that question?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fairly consistent, but also some individual nuances as well. In one instance, the individual said, become more confident and assertive when working with coworkers and establishing a better relationship with them, not only within the work setting, but also with family and friends. Because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not just what happens at work, but it also is how we engender trust in life in general. Right?
Yes.
So that was one. Another one, let me see here, to feel confident with others or myself that when we'll need something or when we're arranging a meeting or a gathering or event, the other person or myself will follow through until the goal is met. We're looking for that. Let's see, what else do we have? We had about, I think there were about 6 or 7 folks that responded. Let's see, another was learn something I can put to use immediately.
Yeah.
Let's see, another was to learn another perspective about what constitutes trust. I'm a facilitator and always looking for new and refreshed information for instructional designs. Let's see.
Bill, given what people said, I'm assuming you feel fairly comfortable that you can address most of those in today's session?
I believe so. And, you know, with an hour, only an hour to go over this kind of material, you can't cover all the bases. But
gotcha.
To your point earlier, anyone who has follow-up questions or would like to have a further conversation, for them to let you know so that we could schedule a time when we could have that, set up that call or that kind of
that's great. That's great. So I would say again, if you know, we're going to do our best to address all of your issues. If for some reason Bill didn't, again, just send me an email. So Bill, what did people say about what trust meant to them? That's I think an interesting question to ask people.
It's a very interesting question. And frankly, what I'm going to do is hold on that until we get a little bit later into the session.
Yes.
Because I want people to hear exactly the exact words of what people said. And see what assessments of trust relate to those statements. One of the things we're going to talk about today, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but there are 4 basic assessments of trust. They relate to sincerity, care, reliability, and confidence. And if you take every situation you've been involved in where there's an issue of really strong trust or maybe strong distrust, typically it can fall into one of those areas or more than one.
That's great.
So we'll go through those a little bit later.
I think that's great. Great. And then the last question we asked Bill was on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being almost never, 5 being typically always, how do you perceive your trust of others? And Bill, what's interesting is we've already had a couple of responses from other people. Someone said 5, someone said 3. So I don't know if there was you know, overarching response from folks, but I thought you might comment on that.
Sure. The interesting thing about these 2 questions, because keep in mind that trust is going to vary depending upon the circumstance and the individual or the group.
Yes.
So you may have established a very strong trusting relationship with someone over the years, and you don't have to even think about it. You don't have to look over your shoulder. They're not looking over your shoulder, whatever, right?
Yes.
In other instances, though, you're cautious. You're mindful of the fact that some things happened in the past. They really didn't go as well as I'd hoped they would, and I don't know how far I can go to trust this person. So I think a big part of this, whether we trust ourselves in terms of how people see us or how we perceive others, it really becomes a matter of what have our past experiences have been. How have we dealt with those situations? Okay, so we had responses. Some people said that they were a 4 with coworkers and 3 with family and friends, which I thought was interesting. That was one of the responses. You know, so that's suggesting something else, some other dynamics that are taking place there. Another one was 4 and 4. How do you perceive people trust you? Person said 4 and perceive your trust of others 4. Let's see, it says 4 of how people trust you and 3 of how you trust others. Others is too broad. I trust some individuals with a 5 and others with a 0. So the reason for these 2 questions was really to get you to start thinking about when you talk about trust, when we talk about trust, it's not just about how we trust others, but how we trust ourselves.
Yes.
And do we actually know how people see us, perceive us?
I think that's great, Bill. So, Bill, why don't you go on to the next slide and we can talk about objectives, and then you can put the hammer down and start preaching to us.
All
So,
right. You
so
got
the
it.
three things that I think Bill is going to do for us today, which I think address, I would say, a significant chunk of what you guys talked about, are one, we're going to learn about the four basic assessments of trust. And as Bill said, he's one of the designers of this transcendent trust model. The second thing, he'll talk about specific behaviors and actions that engender and or restore trust. Sometimes, it does happen, whether intended or not, that sometimes, trust is broken. And so there's ways to restore trust. And then I think the third thing he'll do, which again, a number of you said you wanted some tools that can take away, is I think he'll expand our personal toolkit on how we can, develop, positive, trustworthy relationships, which in the end of the day, I think will produce, not will, but do produce, significant, positive business outcomes. So those are the three things that we're going to focus on today. So with that, Bill, I'll let you take it away from here.
All righty, Ken. Thanks very much. Now, this next slide is about questions for your own self-reflection. Not asking you to answer these questions on the webinar, but these are things that I'd like you to be thinking about or trying to keep in mind as we go through the material this afternoon. We've talked a little bit about how you define trust, and I'm going to talk more about that when we get to that actual definition of trust a little bit later in the webinar. But what is your personal role and responsibility in creating trust? How often do you think people really think about that? Do people really stop and pay attention and say, I've got a responsibility here to help generate trust on my team, or trust in my family, or trust with my friends? And so what is that role? What is that personal role? And what are those behaviors that engender trust that you actually practice on a regular basis? Can you identify what they are? Do you know what they are? Right? And then also, one of the things that I found in a lot of our work is that people have a very hard time opening up conversations of trust. They may feel that there's something I can't trust about this person or about this group, right? But they're at a loss as to how to go about actually having the conversation. So it's almost as though I don't trust you, you don't trust me, and never the two will meet, right? Well, we can't operate in today's world that way. I mean, we might think we can, but bottom line is nothing will ever get accomplished effectively if we do that. So how do you go about opening up the conversation? One way of opening up the conversation is if you both parties have a common framework that talks about the distinctions of trust, okay? And those distinctions of trust relate to the four assessments that I already mentioned about care, sincerity, reliability, and competence. So think of a situation where you're working with a coworker, and this coworker continuously is missing their deadlines. And when they miss their deadlines, it's causing you to miss your deadlines because you're relying upon them for certain data and information, right? You know that, or at least you believe or feel that they're sincere. They want to do what they say they're going to do. That they care about the outcome for everybody involved. But their reliability is in question, maybe even a certain degree their competence to be able to get things done. So rather than going to that person and saying, I really don't feel I can trust you, which most people wouldn't do anyway, you can actually have a conversation, not that it's easy, but you can have a conversation around, I've noticed these following things. Can we talk about it? I've noticed that there have been missed deadlines, and that's affecting my work and work of others. So let's talk about it. But most people, they won't have the conversation because they're either fearful, they don't know how to do it, and they just figure let it go away. I won't deal with this person at all. The four basic assessments I've just mentioned. We do this both consciously and subconsciously, right? If you believe somebody really doesn't care about the outcome for both you and that person themselves, or for your team and the other team, then you're going to have a hard time working with that person, right? So care is a really important element. People need to step up to the plate and actually talk about that. And it may be that that perception is not a good, it's not an accurate perception or assessment. We make assessments all the time about other people and about what their intentions and motivations, their hidden agendas, what all those things are. And all that stuff gets in the way of creating that a trusting relationship if it's not in place already. And then the last question here is, what will you do differently as a result of the webinar? That ties back to what Ken said a moment ago in terms of the two questions at the end. Okay. All right. Now this is a poll that we'd like you to take. Characteristics of work environments that have distrust. And you'll notice in the question, which of the following sample characteristics of distrust are highly evident in your work environment? And we promise you this information is not going to be recorded for my company or agency or anything of that sort, okay?
Yes, right.
But if you could, and you'll notice there is an I, which is all of the above. But keep in mind, the question says highly evident in your work environment.
That's
so
great.
We could take a few minutes, if you could go through that and check all the ones that apply, or if none apply, that's great. And then we'll see what we get.
Gotcha. We'll keep the poll open for another 20 seconds. So if everyone can vote, and then we'll see what the data tells us. So we're going to close the poll in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Oh, there you go. 3, 2, 1. All right, Sarah, if you can close her up, that would be great. And let's see the results.
Okay. So we have, it's really spread in many respects, but the percentages are not as high as some might expect it to be, although there's 33% said all of the above.
Yes.
So one third of the participants are in organizations where these characteristics of distrust are highly evident.
Yes.
That's a pretty significant finding. The other one that comes out high is the inadequate performance management and feedback. This is one of the areas in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and most other employee surveys that are not tied to the federal government, where you will see that people do not believe that performance feedback is provided appropriately or that action is taken relative to poor performers by their supervisors or managers or leaders. So that's something that shows up as well. But for the most part, the numbers are low. Now we only had, let's see, we've only got 3 for all of the above. So was everybody able to?
So people say, Bill, for whatever reason, they weren't able to, they could only vote for 1. They couldn't do 2.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's unfortunate, but.
Yep.
But what I would suggest to everyone is, take a look at this list, after the webinar today.
Yes.
And have a conversation within your team, with your coworkers. Are these things highly evident in our work environment? And if they are, how long have they been there? And are we going to allow this to continue this way? What actions are we going to take to address this? Right?
Great.
So these are examples of what you typically would see in distrustful kinds of work environments. This is not a complete list, but it's a pretty significant list anyway. Okay, so if we go to the next one, poll, which is, we're going to probably run into the same thing. Sample characteristics of trust that are highly evident in your work environment. So again, people may not be able to click more than one category.
Bill, this one, everyone can select more than one.
Oh, okay, great.
That's great. All right, so we'll keep this poll open for another 25 seconds. So if everyone can vote, thank you, Sarah. So we'll close the poll in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So someone said I would have selected none of the above. So Bill, you may want to talk about none of the above, which is interesting.
Uh-huh.
And so what do you make of these results, Bill?
So let's see, what do we have here? We got a pretty good distribution between all the categories.
Yes.
Oops, let me go back here 1 second. I jumped ahead. Okay, so now we only had 1 of 14 indicate all of the above, which are characteristics of trust that are highly evident. So what this is telling me is that, for one thing, is that there's a lot more improvement and opportunities we can achieve within our work environments, because under ideal circumstances, you would want all of these elements to be in place. You would want people to feel that the employees are respectful and care about one another, that each team member has an opportunity to be successful, that people hold one another accountable on their commitments, they address performance issues with one another. So it's telling me that we're doing some of these things, but we're not doing all of these things. The ones that we are doing, let's see, 5 employees keep commitments with which they don't personally agree. So 5 of 14, 36% said that that is an element of trust in their environment that's evident, highly evident. There's another role here too, and that relates to leaders. And sometimes this gets more attention than it needs, but sometimes it doesn't get enough attention. The role of the leader, if you are carrying out a role, if you are in a leadership role, right? And by leadership, I mean, even if you're a supervisor, manager, quote, leader, whatever, that you are having a fundamental impact every day on the team that you work with and that works for you, right? So everything that you do is observed. Everything that action you take, things that you say, people are taking it in, all right? So I'd like you to think, in the context of what's here, are you providing members opportunities to succeed? Are you doing things that ensure that people feel respected and cared for? Are you addressing performance issues or encouraging team members to address performance issues with one another? Those types of things. So this is information for an even more colorful kind of conversation if we had more time, Ken.
Yeah.
But I do believe that what's interesting to me out of this is that only 1 of 14 indicated that all of these are in place. So that's suggesting to me again that we can do a much better job in generating trustworthy environments. And do we have comments? Other comments coming in?
I think we're good. Yeah,
we good?
I would. Yep, I would. Yep, let's. I would move along. We're good.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep.
Great. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so I think we all know about this, the business case for trust, Stephen Covey's work and the work of several other people. You know, The Speed of Trust, his book, which came out many years ago. You can make decisions faster, you can get things accomplished more quickly, you know, when people trust one another. So there is truly a business case. And it's either, if you don't have trust in strong suit, that's tax. And if you do have it economically, it's a dividend. It's almost like your bank account. You may have a bank account that's quite full, but you start making withdrawals from that bank account or trust account, and over time it's going to deplete. Sometimes it doesn't take as many instances of that depletion to cause your account to go into the negative. Covey also says, as I mentioned a moment ago about leadership, the ability to grow, build, repair, and extend trust is the single most important leader competency in a new global economy of leaders. And I really, truly believe that. I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing in this arena if I didn't believe that we have an opportunity as organizations, as teams, as individuals, and as a country for that matter, to do a much better job of creating trust with one another. But we have to be open and willing to doing so. We have to want to listen and to learn from one another. Now, defining trust. This is a definition from Julio Elaya, who's with Newfield Network. He started Newfield Network, which is a company that provides coaching certification for individuals who want to be coaches. And this is his definition. He talks about authentic trust is the decision to coordinate action with another person based on available evidence and a willingness to risk betrayal of that trust. So implicit within the whole term of sense of trust is there's a potential for betrayal. If you extend trust to someone, you don't really know the person that well, but let's say you automatically go ahead and extend trust. They'll either honor your trust in them or they won't, right? But sometimes when you show that you trust others without a lot of available evidence, they will return the trust to you twofold, okay? Now, what you all said in terms of your own definition of trust, let me just read a couple of these to you, because I think these are interesting. Here's one. You can rely on what someone tells you, promises to do what they said they would do, and let you know if and when there are obstacles, priorities change, or whatever the case may be, right? So when you think about that, it says you can rely on. This goes into this one itself relates to reliability, the assessment of reliability. I can rely upon you to do, and also sincerity, to say what you mean and do, right? And I'll show you the definitions for the 4 assessments in just a moment. Another definition of trust, to feel confident with others or myself that when we need something or when we're arranging a meeting, gathering, or event, the other person or myself will follow through until the goal is met in a timely manner. That's also around reliability. Another definition you will provide is people believe you will do what you say you're going to do. That's sincerity. People believe what you say. Another definition, I can count on another person doing what he or she says would be done. I can approach them confidently with questions and get truthful responses. And one other, and I'll share with you, because there are a couple others, but knowing someone will act with integrity, do what they say, be respectful, act professionally, problem solve, and resolve conflict constructively, and value the results of the relationship. So a lot of what you all provided in terms of the advanced questions tie very nicely into the 4 assessments of trust. Here are some thoughts around trust that I think are really important to consider. For example, look at the very first statement. Would we agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you read further down, you read to authentic trust can never be taken for granted. You may have trust in a very strong way with another individual, with a team, with whomever. But there's something called attentiveness to trust, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on today. But it's about looking at the little things that can help, but that can cause trust to erode over time. Are we looking out for those? Are we mindful of those situations? Are we rushing around so fast, so furiously that we forget and we don't realize the impact of the things that we're doing? This comes from a book called Building Trust by Robert Solomon and Fernando Flores. A great book if you all are interested in doing more deeper dive. Definitely encourage you to consider looking into that. And also the effects of trust, distrust, and trust. Now, you'll see at the bottom, it says Charles Feltman, The Thin Book of Trust. Well, Charles is a colleague of mine. In fact, Charles and Richard Hughes and I have developed a trust certification program that we can talk a little bit more at the end of the session that we're offering now. But Charles wrote this book called The Thin Book of Trust. If you want something that's a very, very good read, and if not an excellent read on trust, it doesn't take that long to read it. It's a thin book, okay, by the title. It's an excellent resource to have on your bookshelf and to reference and share with other people. But what I like is the way he describes what distrust is. Often good work is being sabotaged by interpersonal conflict, political infighting, paralysis, stagnation, apathy, or cynicism. Almost always one can trace these problems to a breakdown in trust. My guess is that we all have, to one degree or another, some of these things going on, right? Good work being sabotaged by those following things. Trust, on the other hand, by contrast, in successful companies where people are innovative, engage in productive conflict. And think about that, productive conflict. Just conflict in and of itself doesn't mean have to be negative. It could be productive conflicts. So let's get to the bottom of what we need to do, even if we disagree, and debate about ideas. Have fun working together. One can find usually strong, trusting relationships. Now, if we had more time on this call or this webinar, I would actually ask you to think of situations where these types of characteristics were in place that you've personally experienced, of either distrust or trust, right? And one thing you can do is certainly think about this after the fact, after the webinar, and asking yourself, am I finding myself spending more of my time at the work environment or even non-work environment in this upper group of distrust or this bottom group of trust? And if you're not in the bottom group, what is it going to take to get there, right? There's also a term that we use called cordial hypocrisy. You can see the definition here. This also comes from Roberto Solomon and Fernando Flores. You look on the right-hand side, you'll see the strong tendency of people, the definition, strong tendency of people in organizations because of loyalty or fear. Keep in mind, loyalty or fear, to pretend that there is trust when there is none, being polite in the name of harmony when cynicism and distrust are active poisons, eating away at the very existence of the organization. Of all the organizations that I've worked with over the years, and many of them really great organizations, but there's always been an opportunity for improving trust. And even when trust was really strong, or you felt it was strong, things could change. People change, offices change, programs change, or whatever happens to be. And you have a different dynamic occurring each year, or can. And so don't allow yourself to fall into this practice of what's called cordial hypocrisy. If you feel that things are not where they need to be, then at least have a conversation with people that you personally trust at work or in life in general. Say, what can we, this is what's going on. And a lot of times the cordial hypocrisy shows up in ways that people will talk out of school about another person. They'll be cordial to one another in person. Say, oh, great, hey, how are you? Everything's fine, whatever. And then when they're away from that person, they'll say something very negative about them to another person. And that usually finds its way back. So the key thing here is don't practice cordial hypocrisy to the extent you can avoid it. But there isn't a single organization I've ever been involved with in terms of working within or having provided work, consulting, training, coaching, where this doesn't exist to some degree. And of course, part of our theory about trust is that it creates positive business outcomes, productivity, organizational well-being, and reputation.
Hey, Bill.
Yes, sir.
A couple of things. One, I know, again, we've got about 20 minutes left.
Yeah.
One question I have is, you've done so much work in this area. Is there a story you can tell us that talks about the value of the work that you've done around trust?
Sure, Ken. And it really, it varies with with either each workshop or each survey. We have a survey that's provides quantitative and qualitative data for teams to gauge their levels of trust internally. One case was a situation where this is a federal agency, and the team leader had a much more positive view of how the team members were interacting with one another and trusting one another. So in the survey, you can actually do scores for the team leader and scores for the team member. And as a result of doing the survey and having these conversations, the team leader realized that their assessment was way off the mark. They wouldn't have otherwise maybe been able to see that without that kind of data. And this whole thing with respect to, surveying around trust, which is a difficult thing to do to begin with. But this is what we set as our mission many years ago, is to say, how can we quantify this? Can we do it? And in fact, we did. And they were able to see on the scores, it was a Likert scale of 1 to 5, you could see the distribution of scores. Now, everybody's response, no names were identified with the responses or anything like that, to maintain confidentiality, because that's absolutely critical for something like this. However, you could see the wide distribution of scores. And there were a couple of people that tend to always show it at the bottom, like a 1, the lowest score you can get, and several others up in 4 and 5, right? As it turned out, in addition to the team leader understanding more about what's really taking place in the dynamics of the team and having the conversation around that with everyone, there were a couple of people that were just so totally negative about the work that by going through the process, they made their own decision to move on to another position because those people were being very disruptive to the rest of the team. And those things are, those things can work both ways, both positively and negatively. However, if you establish that foundation, that floor of ensuring that, look, this is what we want to accomplish on our team. This is what we're after. These are the behaviors. And then as a result, what they did is they identified three or four behaviors that they're then going to hold themselves accountable to in interacting with one another to engender trust. And it really made a big difference because we went back 6 months later and their scores were, like really high at that point. So, just having the conversation can sometimes open up the doors more so than you would think. That help?
I think that's great. Thank you, Bill. Really, I think that's helpful to hear an actual story about how does this play in Peoria. I think that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, so I know we have just a little bit. I'm going to jump through a couple of these next slides because our time is getting short. I put this in here only because I wanted you to look at the bottom one where it says it's a matter of trust. This is a Andrew Atkins Rotman Manager Fall 2013. You'll see the source above that was 2011. A lot of people think that this whole issue of declining trust has been happening more since 2015, 16, or whatever. There's been decline in trust everywhere in America over the past 10 plus years. And that's identified in lots of different research reports and what have you. In fact, to the point that it says if distrust were a disease, we declare it an epidemic. And then the other quote here, more than 80% of employees believe that being effective in their work requires a high degree of trust in their leaders. How does that then show up, right? There's another source that if you're interested in more detail, it's called the, what is the name of the report? There's a report, I'll remember it. I had it, I had it over here somewhere else. But I'll get that for you as well. All right, so here, opening conversation. This again is something for you to look at and think about. I'm not asking you all to take a look and try to do anything with this right now, but think about the kinds of conversations that are occurring, not occurring, or not occurring, the general mood of the team. Do your colleagues smile and laugh every day? I mean, that's one indicator right there. And then how do you manifest this whole notion of trust with one another, okay? Okay, this is our point of view regarding trust. And I'll just let you read that, again, given the time we have available. I want to leave some time at the end. But this is some of our thinking in terms of our point of view. The trust is the heart of healthy survival and resiliency of any organization and its people. And if you don't have it, you're going to see it right away. Now, this part is what I wanted to, again, get to you in terms of the 4 categories or 4 assessments of trust. So we have care, sincerity, reliability, and confidence. You'll see that our model on the right-hand side, it says the 4 assessments of trust up here. Then there's attentiveness to trust, and then actions to build trust, maintain, and restore trust, and then organizational and team culture. What we're talking about today primarily is just the first 4 up here: care, sincerity, reliability, and confidence. But the model is bigger than that. It's got all these other elements to it as well. So when we talk about care, I touched upon this a little bit before. A belief that others have your best interest in mind as well as our own when they make decisions or take actions. And then these are some of the behaviors, both from a team leader and a team member perspective in terms of how care is demonstrated, the behaviors that you take to demonstrate care. And I really would like you to think after this webinar, take a situation you recently encountered where it caused you to feel that something wasn't right, okay? And that almost to the point of it was really distrustful, okay? In what domain, in what assessment, what of trust did that issue show up? Was it because your sense that, your assessment that the other person didn't have your best interest in mind as well as others, okay? Or was it around sincerity? Belief that others do not intend to deceive us. And again, here are behaviors that are listed as well. Reliability. We talked a little bit about reliability. Others have fulfilled their promises consistently over time. So this is just a short list of behaviors, both from a team leader and team member perspective, things that you can be doing. We have 72 statements in our tri-sentence trust assessment that get at these behaviors, okay, and actually measure these behaviors. And then fourth, competence. Do you have the competence? It's that our belief that others have the ability to do what they promised. And one of the big ones up here is team leader removes non-productive members from the team. Many times that doesn't happen, or you don't think it's happening. It may be happening behind the scenes, but or people look the other way and they just don't do anything with it. But again, think of these 4 assessments. Let's go back to them again. Think of these 4 right here. And think of a situation you've recently encountered and ask yourself, in what domain did that issue of distrust show up? Was it the person's sincerity? Was it their reliability? Was it their competence? Was it their care? And with that, and it could be more than one, right? It could be a couple. And with that, you have an opportunity to then say, okay, I'm breaking this down, breaking trust down into smaller components. And with that, I don't have to go to this person and say, I don't trust you, but I can have a conversation around their reliability, getting things done on time, right? Or their competence. Do they have the necessary training and skills that they need to do the job that they've been assigned to do? So again, think about that after the webinar today, and ask yourself, in what domains does this fall? And of course, to restore trust, that's one of the most difficult things that we can do. But we have to be willing. We have to be willing to acknowledge previous breakdowns, and we have to want to restore the relationship to a former productive level. It may never get back to the actual level it was before, but it can get back to a better level, even if there's still questions regarding it. Okay. And then organizational and team culture. Think about what's the prevailing mood of your team. This is another question for you to consider and think about after the webinar today. Is the prevailing mood of your team, does it fall into resentment? Does it fall into resignation? Does it fall into peace and acceptance with the way things are right now and hopefully improving it along the way? Does it fall into the mood of ambition, knowing that you make a difference, you and your team members make a difference? And if you could make one change, just one change for yourself and one change within your team, what would that change be that would have the greatest impact to improve trust? And I'd like to challenge you on this, to think about this. And it might be that this is an example, Ken, where would want people to, or would ask people rather, to share with us what those are, right? What one change would have the greatest impact to improve trust on your team? It'd be helpful to be able to know that, and even follow up with conversations around that. Okay. We've talked about this already. Trust encourages and speeds up all these different things: decision-making, collaboration, collective ownership of outcomes, and so forth. And by the way, you will receive all of these slides as part of the webinar today. Even though I know we've got to go through some of these fairly quickly. And then these next 3 pages, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but these next 3 pages identify actions that engender trust. So keep your word about the little things as well as the big things. Set and follow through on performance expectations and accountabilities. Apologize for letting a colleague or client down. How often do we do that? Hold your colleagues accountable for delivering on goals. Deliver your own commitments on time. Admit openly if you don't have an answer. I've seen too many times where people think they try to, go around the issue like, well, I'll get the answer. I have the answer, but they don't have the answer. So just admit openly and you'll find it out. Raise issues of trust directly with colleagues, and don't practice cordial hypocrisy, which we talked about a moment ago. Now, the interesting thing about trust, all these things are important in order to generate a trustworthy kind of environment. So you can see there's a lot here. There's an awful lot here. And this is one reason I think why you don't see trust always as in a strong suit as you might like it to be in some organizations, because you need supportive leadership, you need engagement of the employees and management, you need shared understandings, predictability, honesty, all these things that are listed. And this is just a short list. This is not a complete list, right? And I think that's one reason why these sort of conditions of creating a trusting environment are sometimes difficult to achieve. But ask yourself also, following this webinar, how many of these do we have in place? Would I use these as descriptors with respect to my environment, my work environment? Would I use them in terms of my personal life, relationships with others? Right? So here is our next question, and what we want to ask you is, what next steps will you take as a result of this webinar? So this is a poll, and what we like to get at here is, as you can see, will you review this webinar presentation with your coworkers or colleagues? Apply the 4 assessments of trust that we've talked about. And again, please keep in mind, everyone, I wish we had more time, but this is a lot of material to cover within an hour, and there's a lot more that we can share with you, and we'd be delighted to do so if that would be of interest to you. But if you can respond, answer these this quick poll, and we'll take a look at what that shows us.
That's
Hi,
great.
Bill, this is Sarah.
Yes, sir.
There's a question. Do you have a book with all this information in it? And the person says they'd like to know what they can do to build trust.
Oh, okay. Well, we have several different tools. In fact, the model itself, we could certainly make the model available for people if they want to see the model. And we have various reports, like a sample team assessment report, team trust assessment report. Is that basically what they're looking for, I think, or no?
Here's what I would suggest, Bill, given, we're at 1:53, I would ask if that person, we're going to give you my email address at the end of the slide, at the end of the session. And if you can send us maybe some more information about what specifically you're looking for, Bill has, a whole host of resources, and I'm pretty certain we can send something. Why don't we end the poll, Sarah, let Bill talk about it, and then we can try to close out the session.
Okay, great. So fantastic. 70% of you will apply those who responded will apply the 4 assessments of trust, which is really great. That's one of the outcomes I was looking for with respect to this webinar. Something that you can actually usefully take away with you and apply it, and think about situations you've been involved in, past and present, where these are the situations that the assessments you had to deal with, right? Oops, I jumped ahead. Sorry about that. Okay. 40% review the webinar presentation with colleagues, discuss levels of trust. That's great. 30% engage in meaningful, respectful conversations about trust. That's only 30%. Now, this is an area where it's a little bit more difficult to have those conversations. But the more you strive to do that, I think the better off you're going to be over time, without question. And so much of this comes from what each of you individually does or doesn't do. We talk about an organization having trust, or team having trust, or whatever. Like, guess what? I mean, organizations and teams are made up of people. So whatever changes in behaviors we have to make in order to engender trust, it comes from each of us individually. It has to start with each of us. And that's the other message I want to convey to everyone today. It starts with you first, okay? And then 10% identify and prioritize team and organizational actions, okay? So again, you can see the first two are things that people can feel they can do. The next two, maybe not as much, but my belief is that you can do those in those last two also with enough time. So, okay, great. Oh, and the other report I wanted to share with you is the Edelman, Edelman Trust Barometer 2019. That was the one I was trying to remember earlier. That's got a great, it's a great resource on how institutions are evaluated for trust. So, and how trust has continued to decline over time. So we need to find a way to stem that tide with that question. So you think here at the bottom, ultimately answer the question, would you trust you and why? Both personally and professionally. That's the other challenge I have for you today. Okay. And here we go. Do you want to take it from here, Ken?
Yeah, so let me just try to finish out the session. So again, we began the session thinking about two questions. What did you learn, and what's one action you're going to take? We will send you out an email in the next 24 hours, and it'll have those two questions. And Sarah, I'm assuming there are a couple of other questions that people have. I'm assuming you can capture those and send them to Bill. Someone, Bill, wanted to know, is there a correlation between bias and trust? My sense is that that might be a bigger answer than you can ask in 2 minutes. If whoever asked that question sends me an email, I think Bill would be more than willing to either answer it via email or have a follow-up conversation with you. Yep. Next slide, please.
Yep. Okay, boom.
So we'll send you some follow-up materials as a result of today's webinar. Next slide. So one of the things that Bill has generously offered is if anyone, and it's hard to believe that someone wouldn't be interested in this issue of trust. Again, Bill has offered to have a free, complimentary, confidential consultation with Bill to either talk about some of the issues in your organization or talk about how you can personally apply some of these tools. So if you are interested in taking us up on that offer, all you need to do is, again, send me an email afterwards, and we'll make that happen. And then the second thing is, we'd be happy to do a training session, more in depth on this topic, that we would be delighted to do either at your offices or in our corporate offices in Bethesda, Maryland. And again, if that's something that you're interested in, you just bot me an email and we can provide details on that. So let's, next slide, please. So again, if you do have any questions, Sarah, is it fair to say that you'll be able to capture some of the questions and feed those to Bill and me afterwards? Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. All right. So if you do have any other questions that come up for you that we haven't had a chance to review, just send me an email. Next slide, please. So next slide. So I want to say three things before we end today. One, if people enjoyed this webinar or any of our other webinars, again, Sarah has added into the chat bar. Our session in November is November 19th. It will again be at 1 p.m. Eastern, and the subject is unconscious bias. So again, one of the participants was interested, and obviously there's a connection between bias and trust. Skip Pettit, who's again a long-term colleague and friend of mine, will be doing that session. again, I'm sure it will be an interesting session and one that we'll all learn a little bit more about this topic of unconscious bias. If, again, you have any questions that we didn't answer, we're giving you my email address, and send me an email. And the last thing I want to do is just thank Bill for providing a really thoughtful, interesting session on a really important topic. And Bill, I'll let you have the final word.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. It's a pleasure, again, being with you all and talking about something that's really a passion for me, which has caused me to spend a considerable amount of my time in terms of trying to find ways to improve trust overall and
Yes.
looking at ourselves. And so I want to thank you all for that. Also, just really quickly, I want to say, Charles Feltman, who wrote the Thin Book of Trust, Richard Hughes and I have developed a Trust at Work certification program. So it's designed for HR and OD practitioners, that is internal folks, as well as internal and external coaches and consultants. And we have an early bird pricing for that if anybody would be interested in learning more about it and registering. Ken, would the best way for people to let you know, and then you can let me know?
That would be great.
Okay, fantastic.
Yep, perfect. All right, everyone. So we try our best to begin and end on time. So thank you all for being present today. I really appreciate it. Again, Bill, thank you so much for providing some valuable information. We've already gotten some thank yous. So Bill, thank you. Thanks to everyone else. Sarah, thank you for being a great administrator, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thanks again, Ken. Most
Thanks,
appreciated.
Bill. All right, bye now.
Bye-bye.